This week on To the Contrary.
First, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the GOP has a woman problem. Then, little progress in hiring for blacks and Hispanics since 1989, and the impact of earnings on spousal perceptions.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, a surprising admission.
Looking ahead to 2018, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is reportedly concerned about women voters and the GOP. According to the Montgomery Advertiser, McConnell wanted to see a woman appointed to the Alabama Senate seat vacated by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. That because, quote, "we are made up of old white men in the Republican Party," end quote. He told Alabama's governor that considering a woman would be really good for the party. The governor did not appoint a woman. The GOP's lack of diversity is really no secret and has been considered an issue for some time now. But the Senate Majority Leader now sees it as an issue. Only 5 of the 52 Republican senators are women. 3 are people of color, and 33 are 60 years old or older. In a Quinnipiac poll earlier this year, 65% of women said they have an unfavorable view of Republicans.
So, Ann Stone, can Republicans win the hearts and minds of women, particularly as we look forward to the 2018 elections?
They can, they will, if they'll spend some time and focus on it. We've seen it before. Bill Powers, who was chairman of the New York Party, made a concerted effort. When Hillary became senator from New York, we actually had more elected Republican women than Democrats.
Bonnie, not as long as they continue to do what they're trying to do right now, repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, which disproportionately benefits women.
I think we're taking a step in the right direction. I do think we can. I think with having fresher faces, newer looks, people that are not a traditional model of old white men who are the Republican Party as people know it, I think we step in the right direction.
I think they have to change their policies and their issues to attract women. Women are increasingly heads of households. The fact that they all of a sudden did away with this idea of wage parity, that is going to play into them as much as the repealing the Health Care Act.
Well, do Democrats need to do that too? They're trying to change messaging for 2018, but do they also, because Hillary won white women, but she, but she lost big among men.
I think the biggest challenge with the Progressive Party, with the Democratic Party, is that when they were talking to voters, especially white working class voters, they didn't lead with the issues of economics and this idea of how are they going to transform their lives. And this is a critique I often have. The majority of white Americans are 56, 57 years old. So if you are on the campaign trail and the only issue you're talking about is family leave, and you're not talking about meeting that voter where they are. In this case, a 56-year-old white woman may have lost her house and her retirement during the Great Recession. Her husband is trying to retool in a new economy, and she has her millennial son living at home. You need to meet her where she is.
I have to agree with you on that. I think that both parties have to retool their message, but Republicans have a strong message for women. The way they present it often puts women off. So they have to learn better how to communicate with women.
What do you think their strong message for women is?
Jobs. That's what they want. They want jobs for themselves, their families, their kids. They want a future for their kids. They want to see tax reform just as much as the men do.
You see, that's the problem.
Right.
That is the mistake that Republicans make. They think that generic issues like jobs and tax reform appeal to women. Sure, they appeal to women, Democratic women too, but you got to focus on where women themselves are. And I have to give credit to McConnell because self-criticism is the best thing that any politician can engage in. I mean, open self-criticism. And he said the truth. And we shouldn't deny that truth.
But with one more Republican woman from Alabama.
Yeah, one by one.
Would that have helped?
One by one. It sure would help. But let me be even-handed here. The critique I would make of my party, which is a party that has attracted women, is how in the world did we lose the last election when our main message ever since the New Deal, has been an economic message. And look who we lost. We lost white union men. So what you hear Democrats doing is criticizing themselves for that and saying we're going back to get our base who deserted us, small numbers, but enough to carry the last election to Donald Trump.
But dividing out from policy, I do think that there have been some instinctive barriers for Republican women for recruitment and getting women to run for office. We had in 2010, we had a pool of women. You see Mitch McConnell trying to jumpstart that process by saying, let's just appoint a woman in Alabama, which again, because one of the things that we don't have, besides Emily's List and other things that the Democrats have built in place for a long time to support women candidates in office, we don't have that on the Republican side. I've worked closely with a number of groups and run a number of groups to focus on infrastructure, on recruitment, on training. We have women like Ronna Romney-McDaniel that are now running the RNC. We have a woman, Elise Stefanik, who's the youngest woman in Congress, who's now leading recruitment for the NRCC. So we have some openings here to try to create a face of the Republican Party that's not a conventional face. And the policy points aside, I recognize those, but at the same time, we are behind the 8 ball, having 4 or 5 women in the U.S. Senate, and we need more than that, and we got to kickstart that process somehow.
But I think what's aspiring about having more women in the Senate is that they are the ones that are leading the health care charge on the Republican side. They are the ones that are taking the votes that the American people need. And to your point of the
I thought it was Chuck and Nancy.
I love Nancy. But no, but in all seriousness, I mean, there is a huge deficit on where women identify themselves. The fact that Emily's List has 22,000 women who have thrown their hat in the ring saying, I want to run for office, it's more than just a vacuum. It's more than just a vacuum on the Republican side. It's saying, I identify with a party, and I want to see how I can actually propel that.
And we're losing
forward.
Congressional women because they're promoting themselves. They're moving into governor's races. We have Kristi Noem, we have Diane Black, we have people like Mary Fallon, strong members of Congress who have left
she's
Congress.
already
Well, I know that, but she was in Congress before them. My point is that we have women who are leaving Congress to go run for governor, and frankly, I think because they're more effective at an executive level, and they've noticed that they can be more effective at an executive level, and that's something. Yeah, and that's something that's a factor as well.
And we know that women have to be asked to run, by and large, and the Democrats did a lot more asking than we did. But like I said, I cited Bill Powers when Bill Powers was New York chairman. He made a decision from the ground up. He was aggressively going to ask women to run, and when he did, more women were elected as Republican than Democrats in New York State.
If the Senate next week is able to overturn Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, will that lose women at the polls in 2018?
I don't know. I think the healthcare debate is not concentrated solely on whether this bill impacts women. I think it impacts all Americans, and particularly in a negative way.
Everything affects all Americans.
Right.
You try overturning Obamacare, and you're going to. The ship is going to lean so far away from Republicans, they will wish they had left well enough alone.
Here's where we do disagree, and that is that when the next round of premiums comes up, if ACA has been repealed and they actually get a health insurance card they can use because the deductibles are reasonable or non-existent because there's more competition, then there won't be any problem.
But I'm curious, what in the world makes anybody think that that's what's going to come out of repealing the ACA?
Competition will drive it.
No. I mean,
always has.
I mean, I think that the fact that you have basically every single medical industry that is opposed to this, everything from the insurers to medical doctors to AR. I mean, you mentioned everybody, and they're saying, what are you doing? Even Grassley basically said, I'm doing it not necessarily because I believe it, but it's because we've promised that to the voters. The Republican Party needs a plan B, and there's nothing that's actually surfaced from it. And I think that would make the Republican Party and folks that have voted for Republicans actually feel more at ease in opposing this piece of legislation.
In the history of the United States, we have never taken away a benefit or made a benefit less than it was. And if you think women are going to stand for that, when the Affordable Health Care Act affects them much more than it affects men, then you don't know women.
ACA is a disaster.
I don't think
the premiums are higher. They're going up in many of the states. Many states only
and the answer is not to repeal it.
Yeah, it's to fix it.
The answer is to do what we did with Social Security, what we did with Medicare. They too are imperfect, and what we did each and every year was to tailor them with what they needed, not to try to repeal them.
This is not a full repeal, but it's a start. It's repealing some of the parts that are most damaging. Again, everybody's insured. Baloney. They had a card they couldn't use because the deductibles were out of control.
I thought what the Senate is considering essentially is a full repeal.
No, it's not
letting states opt
Of course
leaving
it's not a
states
appeal.
opt
It's not a full
out,
appeal.
which means they
Well,
will.
That's why-
Can I just say that you have two women, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, who are very likely to vote against this, and you may very well see a third woman that votes against this, Shelley
They
Moore
can only
Capito.
lose
And if
one
you
more.
do, then we won't be talking about
Right.
this next week.
And again, it will
So-
be women who
It will
say
be women,
this.
right? That's my point to you. So I don't dispute that for
We'll
1
see.
second.
We'll see.
Looking ahead again, what's everybody's forecast on what's going to happen is there's no chance that with the congressional races, there's no chance the Democrats will take back the House.
The only reason we won't be able to take back the House is that the Republicans gerrymandered, the hell out of the states. And to give you an example, in the last 3 elections, we won. There were more Democrats who voted than Republicans, and yet we did not win more seats because they're gerrymandered into districts, which means their vote don't count. So we will do much better in the House, but it would be a miracle to overcome that gerrymandering.
Your forecast.
One prediction that I have is that I think over the next 3 months, depending on how Congress is able to accomplish something or nothing as it relates to the Trump agenda, tax, healthcare, infrastructure, other issues, keeping the government open, immigration, I think it's potential that you see a number of retirements in the Republican Party, particularly in the House. And with open seats, it's a free-for-all. We're not fighting in a primary to compete against our own members. You have an opportunity to see new, fresh faces in Congress. So I don't know that changes.
22,000 young women recruited by Emily's List and Running Start and all the groups will be running for those seats.
Exactly right. But if we thought that congressional districts were expensive now, opening up all those seats is going to become much more expensive.
All right.
And
let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter @BonnieRBay. From women in politics to job offers and race.
A new study charges racism remains an obstacle for many African American job seekers. The study found the same anti-black hiring discrimination that existed in 1989 is just as widespread today. Researchers from Harvard and 3 other institutions conducted 2 separate experiments. In one, resumes were sent out with people with similar experience and educational backgrounds, but some applicants had stereotypically black or Latino names, while others had white-sounding names. The second experiment sent job seekers with similar ages and experience to apply in person. Some were black or Hispanic, while other applicants were white. Researchers found the white applicants received, on average, 36% more callbacks than equally qualified African American applicants and 24% more than Latino candidates.
So, Eleanor, you used to run the EEOC, we should say, but also I was just shocked with all the diversity. I mean, diversity, at least until President Trump came into office, was the most fashionable thing in corporate America. They were hiring consultants, how to become diverse. I mean, to me, to become diverse by hiring more people of color, hiring more women. But they needed consultants to instruct them in it. And all these major corporations doing all this to diversify, and we're still stuck in 1989?
Really demoralizing, Bonnie. But as I look at it, how could this be? When I chaired the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, I had the good fortune to do so at a time when the country was electrified by feminism and by the whole notion of getting somewhere on not only women but African Americans as well. I noticed that this said somehow in the 70s and 80s is the high point. But it does tell us what happens when you don't keep the issue before the American public, because we are talking about something as old as the millennia, discrimination against women. And if you just relax because it's a little better, and it is a little better, then we will slide back because it's much too entrenched to require anything but a long-term effort that does not let up.
Media spotlight on companies that discriminate helps. And quite frankly, what did women have to do to be able to have a breakthrough? They had to get out and start their own companies. That was a big part of it. And by 2018, it's projected that half of all new jobs in our economy will be created by women-owned businesses.
Really?
That's spectacular.
By 2018?
By
That's just
2018.
a year
You got
from
it.
now.
You got it. I haven't seen any revision to that. So I look forward to hailing that. as a real step
One
forward.
of the reasons that women were allowed to basically hang their own shingle was because you had a lot of SBA loans that the government gave, prioritizing this for women.
And government contracts.
Government contracts. And sadly, that was one of in the Trump budget was one of the line items that they've actually singled out, saying that they no longer need it. So as we continue to evolve.
No longer need diversity in
these particular loans, these particular SBA loans are basically no longer part of the line items in the budget. And so, typically the government, when we actually see major change in our country, the times when we see major change in our country is when the government intervenes and says, look, we do not have parity, whether it's a government piece of legislation, whether it's a study, and then all of a sudden that helps change behavior. And I do agree with you. I also think that the media allows to shed light on this, but it's not just the media. We have to ensure that there are regulations in place that allow people to feel penalized if they are not moving the country forward in this case.
I'm not an expert on this, but as a minority woman named Jennifer Higgins, I'm guessing that I've had a job interview or two where someone was a little surprised when I walked into the office. But what I will say is that you see the concentration of power in HR offices and in HR managers, and again, we can't often change that sort of subjective nature of hiring as it relates to people saying, I look at you and see something similar, and that's why I'm hiring you or not hiring you. I do think that it would be great if we looked at different ways to to test on implicit bias and people's biases as hiring managers. Maybe that helps to some extent by imposing that on employers. And then the other piece of that, I think, is also some level of sort of public information about demographics, about the types of people that are being hired in certain environments. And I know that some of that is public, but I think the more willingness that corporations and entities have to sort of disclose that maybe put some personal accountability on the organization to say we need more women or we need more minorities.
But here, as Eleanor mentioned earlier in the show, what you have is the Trump administration pushing back on regulations that were in place from the Obama administration to force companies to make all that information more available.
Right, and there's a difference of opinion there with respect to the government's role in pushing that along. And in certain cases, yes, absolutely, there needs to be a government pressure point, but I still am...
Why are they going to do it unless the government
I agree. I mean, I don't disagree with that.
It.
I'm just saying I think that there are some employers that, again, are only going to be prompted by government regulation and others that are still willing to be voluntary about their efforts to try to support and encourage minority hiring practices.
And then one other little piece of women's history again. If women understood the part women have played in business, do you know franchising was a concept developed by women? There are all kinds of things that women in business did that the American public doesn't know, and I think that also will help inspire more women to start their own businesses, more minorities to start their own businesses.
Well, do we know women are doing, from this report, do we know women are doing worse than people of color, or people of color are doing worse than women, right? In terms of diversity and
there are women who are of color.
Right, that's true too.
So I think there's a lot of challenges there. In fact, the number one leaders of hanging a shingle are Latinas, Hispanic women, but it's not enough to hang a shingle. You actually need to make sure that you're appropriately resourced, appropriately financed, that you have the learnings that you need in order to do the basic functions of a company, right? Having your own company, and that's where you need to make sure that you're actually providing support so that they're successful in the long run.
No, the test shows, if anything, people of color are doing worse because they're using last names, they use first names, not last names, and simply not giving them interviews. No, this is bad. This is retrogression.
Is it going to get worse under this administration?
It looks that way.
Media spotlight.
No, but I think, again, it's this idea that we're not preparing our country for the future. So Generation Z, they're going to be voting for the first time in the midterms. They're the last majority white majority in this country. My children, who are 3 and 5, they are majority minority. If we do not have folks, women and people of color, disproportionately in reflecting the country, we're not preparing ourselves economically for the future, not only for the United States, but to continue playing on a global stage.
All right, from hiring discrimination to household incomes.
In about a third of U.S. married or cohabiting couples, women earn as much as or more than men. This is a new finding included in a Pew Research Center study out this week. Women are quickly rising as family earners. More women are advancing to college degrees and graduate school. These trends, along with the fact women with higher levels of education and income are more likely to marry, have boosted the economic status of married households. Today, married adults are much more likely to live in upper-income households than are non-married adults. But according to a new Pew poll, lower-income adults are more likely than those in higher-income families to say earning power to support a family is critical to making a man or a woman a good spouse or partner. For example, 41% of adults with annual family incomes below $30,000 say this is a very important attribute for a woman, compared with 23% of those with incomes of $75,000 or more.
So, Maria Teresa, is this why pay inequity persists?
Because perception.
Because lower income people are more likely to say it's okay, that it's good for a woman to earn more, and it's important in her relationship with her partner or spouse, whereas upper income people, who are the ones who are doing the hiring, don't believe that.
Well, I think they put less pressure. I think that if you're earning more, all of a sudden you actually have more flexibility of how you use your time, and you don't have to necessarily have to work. You may be able to stay at home, and as a result, you have a different life experience than the person who is below the poverty line or close to the poverty line, saying, no, actually, in order to feed my children, I need to make sure that my wife or my spouse is earning equally for the same work.
Are younger people more likely to not have this attitude that men are the primary breadwinners? And
I think so. I think some of this is a societal shift. I think you see that in generations. I myself am in my late 30s, not married, no children, spent my time trying to build what I would consider sort of financial independence so that I could prepare myself for that. Maybe that's not conventional, but I think we need to do more of building upon that generational sort of notion, which is whether you're low income or middle class or high income from a family or household, that you acknowledge that this Prince Charming effect needs to sort of fall by the wayside, which is that a man's going to come in and support you and take care of you. And if you can position yourself through education and opportunity, you can be able to do that yourself. And then you're marrying for different reasons than sort of the traditional norm.
Are you surprised that now in a third of couples, women out-earn the men?
I am, actually. But I'm disappointed that despite that, apparently not just among low-income people still think that the male breadwinner is more important than the woman in the household. If that were the case, there would be a lot of households that wouldn't be very well off today.
Yeah, but...
And let me just say something I think that is really important. If anyone has suffered in the 21st century economy, it is men, because they were disproportionately dependent upon men's work, and that work has gone offshore. The work, of course, in manufacturing jobs and the rest, and they are literally having to retrain who they are as a man and to accustom themselves to jobs that sit down and acquire knowledge in the knowledge economy.
Question, are women willing to talk about it if they out-earn their spouses or partners?
I think some are, but it very much is a generational thing, because older generations of men were very threatened when the women in the household made more. That's not so true with the younger generation. They are happy to have a spouse that earns lots of money for them. That's not a problem.
And a lot of them are happy to stay home with the kids and be the primary caregiver.
More and more. I see more and more young people coming together as partners rather than in the more traditional married couple.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right. And if you ask oftentimes folks that may not be doing well why they don't divorce, it's because of the economic linchpin between them.
Well, marriage was originally an economic concept anyway, even more than...
Oh, it still is.
It wasn't for love, it was for money.
Right. Still tax consequences.
Do you think male bosses feel more so that men should be the primary breadwinner, or is that changing too?
The unenlightened ones do.
I'm sure.
I think it's generational.
I'm sure of it. I'm sure that if men and the bosses had to make a decision, they would opt for the man as the, quote, head of household, even though they don't even know if that's the case.
Well, in the old days, you'd get a male boss saying, well, so-and-so has to support her family. You'd never catch a boss saying that unless they really want a discrimination suit.
I'm curious. I want to go back to the views of upper income families versus why are lower income families more willing, think it's more important for the woman to be a big earner, or
because of single woman households.
Right.
Yeah.
They are burgeoning. Right. They're growing in such large numbers that they know they are all that there is. So they step right up and say the woman is the one who has to earn money, because she's the one who disproportionately our society depend upon to raise its children.
Well, but women-headed households, are they predominant among families earning $30,000 and less? Do we have any data about that?
Yes, we do.
far more than as you
Yeah.
rise up the income level.
It's one of the reasons that's part of the source of poverty, continuing poverty.
Right, sure. I mean, because all kinds of polls and studies have shown if you marry, if you don't have a kid before you graduate high school, better yet, college, and if you marry before you have children, you're much less likely to live in poverty. Then why haven't all the women who are single-headed households heeded that message?
Because they're not getting the message.
Because it takes two to tango.
They're not getting the message.
Let's start tangoing.
The media spend more time talking about that stuff. They're not getting the message.
Okay, we're talking about it here. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.